Audi's expected to make a massive U-turn with its F1 team before even getting on the grid. There's still more than a year to go before we see Audi officially enter F1 in 2026, but the lead up to the German giant's much anticipated debut has been troubled to say the least. Sauber, the team that Audi's buying, is in competitive freefall. The people in charge of the Audi F1 project keep changing, and there are wider Volkswagen Group problems as well. The pressure's been mounting over the past 18 months or so, and in that time, Audi's faced a lot of rumours it could sell up before it even gets on the grid. We've even had to explain a few times why that wasn't really on the cards, but now it is, sort of. Having only agreed this year to buy 100% of Sauber instead of just 75%, Audi looks likely to agree a part sale of the F1 team long before 2026 begins. An announcement of an investment by Qatar's sovereign wealth fund is expected before the Qatar Grand Prix on December the 1st. The suggestion first emerged in Germany and even included speculation that the Qatar Investment Authority could buy a controlling share. But what's really anticipated is a minority stake that still leaves Audi in charge of the F1 project, just with less of a financial burden to bear. It's not a bad trade in theory and is in keeping with what we've seen other teams do, as we'll explain shortly, but it's still a red flag. Regardless of who Audi would sell to, changing its mind on owning 100% of its F1 team, having emphasised the importance of that control when it was announced only this year, is confusing and effectively a public admission that it has yet more problems to resolve. Audi's initial takeover of Sauber was agreed in late 2022 and was set to be a majority ownership, with existing owner Finn Rousing through his Islero Investments company retaining 25%. That changed when Audi opted to take 100% control, a move announced in March 2024 and described by the company as a key part of accelerating its preparations. The full takeover was due to be finalised well in advance of 2026, when Audi will rebrand the team completely and officially enter F1 for the first time at the start of new regulations that will include the debut of Audi's first F1 engine. But now, Audi seems to have changed its mind a little. Audi's not commenting on the speculation, but its interest in a part sale, which has apparently been in the works for months, likely reflects the extra investment required to turn around Sauber's headquarters in Hinwil. Purchasing the Swiss team while setting up its own bespoke F1 engine facility at the Audi Neuburg base has come at immense cost. The team acquisition is likely to have cost around $600 million, and the engine development will have a 9-figure cost attached to it too. The reality of the spend on the Sauber side is a big deal for Audi, which also had to appeal to the FIA for an adjustment to its cost cap to account for salary costs in Switzerland being higher. Without that, Audi would have probably needed to close that factory and relocate it somewhere cheaper. Even so, funding further developments at Hinwil via external investment will ease pressure at a time when the parent VW Group is taking drastic action to reduce costs, including Audi plant closures and thousands of jobs being cut. It's never a good look for a company to be doing this while pumping in massive resources to a motorsport project, especially F1, which is as expensive as it gets. And given Audi's not even on the grid yet, it's getting zero of the benefits back. All this is why it was being suggested last year that Audi might decide to cut its losses, sell the team, and go back on the plan to enter F1 altogether. That was almost never going to happen, not least because it would be publicly humiliating. But any program under the control of an automotive manufacturer is always vulnerable to variables like wider company performance, so finding a more pragmatic way to proceed was going to become essential at some point. It's happened sooner than we might have expected, given Audi's not even in F1 yet, and the trigger for that is the VW Group circumstances changing. The loss of pro F1 personnel who drove the entry and wider priorities like plant closures and job losses are major factors. Audi's F1 team needs to do more than justify its existence, that existence needs to be altogether cheaper. Cynically, you may ask if Audi's plan was never to retain 100% ownership at all. Maybe Audi purchased the remaining 25% from Rousing at the same relative value it agreed the first deal at, and then intended to offload a minority share further down the line at an inflated price. That doesn't seem likely, as Audi was way too publicly wedded to the notion that going all in and assuming full control was crucial to its plans. This feels more like cashing in early in response to the wider problems. Taking advantage of an inflated team value must be part of the appeal, even if it wasn't mapped out exactly like this a year ago. The original deal estimated Sauber's value somewhere around $600 million. This seemed quite low even for a team with Sauber's weak recent history. After all, it was on the up and in the middle of a much better 2022 season when this was negotiated. So a rough $600 million valuation, even give or take $100 million, left massive room for it to grow, especially as the prestige of the Audi brand and the increase in the team's potential with Audi behind it would cause an immediate hike, and still more than compensate for any damage done by Sauber's on-track slump in the last couple of years. The broad claim that all teams are now worth $1 billion seems to check out. Last year, Renault sold 24% of its F1 team for just over $200 million, valuing the team at the time at around $960 million. So having paid a fairly low price to get on the grid, in the context of these estimated 2024 team values, Audi can flip its team, or at least part of it, for a massive profit. Let's say the Qatari stake is indeed a minority. The original 25% share Audi was happy to leave with Rousing seems a logical place to start, as it's an ownership structure Audi has proven itself content with. Assuming the team value is now $1 billion, selling a quarter of the team to Qatar will net Audi $250 million. That's pushing close to half of what Audi's paying Sauber for full control. The exact numbers will of course be different, and the percentage might well be lower, but either way, we can't imagine Audi's pocketing anything less than $100 million for a part sale. That could go a very long way to not just funding the project, but making it justifiable for Audi and the VW Group to stay involved, given the wider context it's battling. If this sale goes ahead as expected, it will continue a clear trend. Retaining a majority stake would keep Audi in control and is unlikely to impact the branding of the team, although we can't completely rule that out. It's more likely if Qatar ultimately wants a bigger slice of the pie, but if Audi does hand over a majority stake in the short term, we'd be surprised and even more concerned. Qatar has hundreds of billions of dollars of assets in various countries across a range of industries. A more subtle, silent investment is consistent with the Qatari strategy of diversifying into various non-domestic organisations like Barclays and even the VW Group, which it owns around 17% of. That makes Qatar the third biggest VW shareholder and means there's already a link to Audi, or at least its parent company. The state has been linked with a potential bid for F1's commercial rights at various points in the last couple of years, and while that hasn't happened, its F1 footprint has grown. It's already heavily invested through the long-term Qatar Grand Prix deal and Qatar Airways title sponsorship. That Qatar Airways deal is a good example of the kind of branding that could easily make its way onto the Saubers next year and stay on Audi's cars beyond that. The point is, the Qatar F1 crossover's pretty extensive already, and another country from this region getting involved in a team directly only felt a matter of time. Although it's not on as grand a scale as Mumtalakat, the sovereign wealth fund of Bahrain, having full ownership of the McLaren Group and majority ownership of the F1 team by extension, it is similar in principle. Qatar gets a potentially high-yield F1 investment attached to a prestigious brand. For a while, McLaren's situation was unique, but new investments, admittedly in minority stakes, have become increasingly common as the value of these teams has risen in recent years due to F1's growing popularity and commercial success. For example, Daimler only owns 1/3 of the Mercedes F1 team, with team boss Toto Wolff and Ineos boss Jim Ratcliffe the other owners. But the most prominent sources of investment nowadays are consortiums in the US and Middle Eastern states. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund is already an investor in the Aston Martin Lagonda car company and has a right to shares in the Aston Martin F1 team, which is sponsored by Saudi state-owned Aramco. As we've now mentioned a few times, the complete takeover of Sauber was considered essential by Audi just a few months ago. It was significant because while it wasn't a good thing that Audi's head start on 2026 was compromised, taking action to address the problems seemed encouraging. It showed Audi was recognising there were issues and admitting the task was greater than it expected, rather than just sleepwalking into a disaster. Former project leader Andreas Seidel was known to be insistent that Audi assumed even greater control at a faster rate to match the greater involvement that was required to address the weaknesses within Sauber. But nothing's improved, not outwardly anyway. Sauber's on-track performance has been woeful, as has its development rate. In terms of quantity and quality of upgrades, Sauber's still lacking, and it's extremely likely it will have a rare pointless season to show for that, which is humiliating for the future Audi works team. Unsurprisingly, there's been a further overhaul of the management of the team as a consequence. A political battle between Seidel and former Audi board member turned Sauber chairman Oliver Hoffmann came at the detriment of progressing the project and led to both being axed. In came ex-Ferrari boss Mattia Binotto, adopting a different dual role of Sauber CEO and chief technical officer instead, while Audi CEO Gernot Dollner added the Sauber chairman job. This was done with an emphasis on clearer responsibilities, but the same line was trotted out when Seidel and Hoffmann took their new roles at the start of 2024. It'll take a long time before recent changes play out positively. Very shortly after Binotto joined, it was announced that Red Bull's highly rated sporting director Jonathan Wheatley would join Sauber next year as team principal. Other significant moves include Binotto hiring his old Ferrari strategy boss Iñaki Rueda. Audi's also finally locked down its first driver lineup, picking Gabriel Bortoleto to partner Nico Hülkenberg at Sauber in 2025 and for the start of Audi's new era in 2026. It feels like an eternity since Audi was embarrassed by its number one driver pick Carlos Sainz picking Williams over this new works team, which reflects how many twists this complicated project has been through already. And yet another change, this time in the ownership, shows why the recent driver saga is just the tip of the iceberg, as who drives the cars is going to be completely irrelevant unless Audi gets its houses in order fast.